I was once teaching in the Black Sea, and some students wanted to take me to an archaeological site. Now, I'm a big fan of archaeology, but also after a long day teaching, I'm also a big fan of beach volleyball and a swim in the sea. But the students said to me that they'd seen the weather forecast, and it was due to be cloudy in Romania that day, and that we'd be better off going to the archaeological site. Now, as it turned out, it was boiling hot, and I really did wish that I was at the beach instead. So the next day, I asked them what the problem was, and it turns out that they were looking at a map of Romania as a whole, and it was indeed supposed to be overcast and cool. But if they'd looked at a map of the part of the country that we were actually in, we'd have seen that it would have been nice and warm and sunny by the coast. Now, what we can see here is the difference between the general climate and the climate where we're particularly interested in. For companies, although the general business climate is important, local weather conditions can often be more relevant. So I use this as an example for how when we're looking at macroeconomic data, we can get a nice picture of the overall view, but for most firms, the microclimate is more relevant. Ultimately, recessions affect the economy as a whole, not individual firms. For example, in the 2010 Rich List, Will Adderley rose from 167th to 91st in the UK rankings for wealthiest individuals. The main reason for this was the success of Dunelm Mill, which was selling relatively value-added furniture and soft furnishings for households. It was precisely because the economy was doing badly in this period that people opted to use Dunelm Mill, and ultimately led to an increase in his wealth. Recessions can be business opportunities. If companies anticipate downturns and diversify into inferior products, i.e. products that have a negative income elasticity, which means that people buy more of them if their incomes fall, then they will benefit. A couple of examples include Aldi. So in this article it says the German discount supermarket chain Aldi has given the green light to a multi-million-dollar refurbishment and upgrade for 150 of its stores nationwide as it continues to scour the suburbs for new leases to meet growing demand for its stores. The push is in line with evidence that consumers are preferring to patronise discount department stores and supermarkets. Now, this article was taken from the Sydney Morning Herald, but also in the UK we've seen a dramatic rise in the market share of Aldi and Lidl since the financial crisis and recession, precisely because consumers had more of a demand for lower priced and higher value goods. Another example, this time from New Zealand, is KFC. The tough economy appears to be helping fast food conglomerate restaurant brands. The company said yesterday it expects to announce an annual profit of $11 million next month. Its KFC business is driving growth, where same-store sales were up 5.5% on the equivalent quarter last year. So recessions can mask the underlying dynamics of the economy. In fact, it's precisely during a recession that those underlying dynamics of the economy become especially important. According to a blog post by Stephanie Flanders, she said, using data from the regular survey of British households from 1991, Lindsay Macmillan found that at the end of the last recession in 1993, more than half of households were earning more than they did in 1991. Amazingly, 1 in 6 had seen their income rise by more than 50%, despite meagre growth in the economy as a whole. And as Tim Harford has said, the variability in individual experience completely drowned out the distinction between growth and stagnation in the underlying economy. Newspapers will often emphasize the economy as a whole, but what we really pay attention to is what's happening at smaller levels in terms of the microclimate. We can see example of creative destruction in the jobs market. From 1997 to 2005, there were 2.65 million private sector jobs lost every year. Now, people may be up in arms to think that so many jobs are being lost, but during this period, 2.76 million were created. So provided the job creation is higher than the jobs lost, the economy is doing well overall. But even when the economy is doing well overall, this still means there's an awful lot of jobs being lost on a routine basis. This was job churn of over 50,000 per week. That's 1 in 7 private sector jobs being destroyed each year. And again, this data is prior to the financial crisis and prior to the recession, and demonstrating the extent of the job losses that we expect to see when the economy is doing well. This is a graph showing from the New York Times the number of jobs that companies create and eliminate each quarter. And critically, what happens in a recession is when you see the jobs cut spiking and the jobs creation falling. But what this graph is also demonstrating is that even when times are good, there's a lot of jobs being lost. Now, it's obviously sad when jobs are lost, and for many people individually, a job loss can be a catastrophic event. It's important, though, to understand the importance for the economy as a whole to have a healthy jobs market, which requires jobs being created and also jobs being destroyed. Falling wages, like any other price, are important signals for entrepreneurs, and we cannot know which industries have underemployment outside of a market process. It's precisely by seeing where unemployment is rising that we can understand which industries are growing and which are shrinking, and where we should better direct resources. There's lots of industries where job losses have been severe, and in some cases, job losses have been permanent. For example, there's very few lamplighters these days. A lamplighter is somebody who would light or maintain gas street lights, and as we've moved to electric street lights, this has become an almost obsolete occupation. However, most people would agree that it is a good thing for society as a whole that these jobs have been lost. It's called technological advance. It's called progress. If we look at survey data from the 1990 to 1991 recession, we see that 10% of companies accounted for 83% of the gross fall in profits. So a big factor in terms of where the losses in the economy were taking place is concentrated on a relatively small percentage of the companies. A recession isn't a situation where most companies lose money. A recession is a situation where you have a few companies find the business environment very challenging indeed. 20% accounted for 92% of the gross fall. The worst hit 10% accounted for 85% of the gross fall in employment. In actual fact, 40% of firms saw their profits rise during this recession. 50% saw their employment rise, which is again showing that whether we're looking at profits or whether we're looking at employment, the downturn is concentrated on a small group of companies, and for the average or typical company, the environment can actually be quite good. If you are a well-run company, then a recession can often be a very advantageous situation because it means rivals may be finding it more difficult. It may mean that the cost of inputs are falling and that the competitive landscape is becoming easier to navigate. We can also update this by looking at survey data from the 2008-2009 recession. Again, this is for the UK. In a survey of 300 companies that had turnover from 5 to 15+ million pounds, during December 2008 and February 2009, 21% planned to expand abroad, 38% expected to make an acquisition, 35% expected to launch a joint venture with a former competitor. And what we can see there is that there's massive opportunities for growth even when the overall economy is looking gloomy. The last slide is showing a map of US unemployment data. And again, we tend to look at headline figures, and newspapers tend to report those headline figures, which amalgamates all of the unemployment data into one single figure for the entire country. But if we look into more detail at state level, if we look at more detail at city level, then we can see that unemployment data is dramatically different. And therefore, if you're looking to expand as an enterprise, it's going to be a lot more important to understand that local data, to understand that microclimate, rather than to get confused and swayed by the general weather.